Have you ever looked at a photograph that isn't there? At the one that should have been, with you in the center, in the perfect dress, with a radiant smile, surrounded by friends, in a moment that was supposed to last forever? But instead, a blank space, a void that no one notices but you. I am Sarah Miller. I am 18, and I did not make it into my prom photo. Not because I was late, not because I didn't show up, but because I lost consciousness 1 second before the shutter clicked. Do you think this is just an accident? No. It was the culmination of months of pain, hunger, and fear. It was the point at which my body could no longer pretend that everything was fine. I want to tell you my story, a story about how the pursuit of an ideal can destroy reality, about how compliments can be poison, about how the photograph that isn't there became the most important frame of my life. Have you ever looked in the mirror and thought, if only I were a little thinner? Have you ever refused food to feel control? Have you ever felt that your body is an enemy that must be defeated? If yes, you will understand me. If no, you will learn how easy it is to get there. This is not just a story about prom. It is a confession. And if you read until the end, perhaps you will see in yourself what I could not admit for a long time. My name is Sarah Miller. I was born and raised in the sprawling suburbs of Austin, Texas, a sprawling grid of neighborhoods where the heat rises in shimmering waves off the asphalt, and the houses stand in perfect, obedient rows. It is a place where the lawns are manicured to the millimeter, a vivid, unnatural green against the scorching sun, and where the silence of the afternoon is only broken by the hum of sprinklers. Here, mothers do not just raise children, they curate them. They compete in a silent, smiling war over whose daughter looks the best, the most polished, the most ready for a life that looks good on paper. From the moment I was old enough to understand the concept of reflection, I knew one absolute truth. Appearance is currency. It is the gold standard. It is the thing that determines whether you are successful, whether you are loved, whether you are simply visible to the world around you. My mother is a former model. She carries herself with a rigid, practiced grace, a ghost of the runway still haunting her steps. Now, she works in a high-end beauty salon, a place that smells of hairspray, acetone, and expensive desperation. She always told me, her voice soft but unyielding as steel, "Sarah, you must be well-groomed. The world is visual, darling. People judge by what they see before they ever hear you speak." I didn't blame her. I never hated her for it. She was simply passing down the survival manual she had been given, the only map she knew how to read. She believed she was arming me for battle. But those words didn't just sit in my mind, they became my internal code. They were written into my operating system. To be beautiful is to be safe. To be flawed is to be in danger. In middle school, I was an ordinary girl. I existed in the comfortable middle ground, not the thinnest, not the prettiest, but not an outcast. I had my tribe, Maddie and Julia. We were a triad of inseparable laughter and shared secrets. We spent our Friday nights sprawled on carpeted floors, eating popcorn, dissecting TV shows, and dreaming about high school, about boys, about the distant, shimmering promise of senior prom. But even then, amidst the laughter, I always felt slightly less than, like a copy of a copy. I felt I was taking up just a little too much space in the world. The turning point came in the 8th grade. It wasn't a dramatic event. It was a Tuesday. I was walking past the lockers, the metallic clang of doors echoing in the hallway, and I heard a boy, someone whose name I don't even remember now, talking to his friend. He didn't know I was there. "Sarah would be pretty," he said, his voice casual, matter-of-fact, "if she just lost some weight." The sentence didn't land like an insult. It landed like a diagnosis. It cut into me with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. I stopped breathing for a moment. The hallway noise faded into a dull roar. Sarah would be pretty, if. The if hung in the air, a heavy, locked gate between me and worthiness. I couldn't forget it. I replayed that 10-second audio clip in my mind every night before sleep. It became my compass. It became my North Star. From that day on, the numbers began to matter. I started counting calories. At first, it was innocent, almost like a game. Just curiosity. How much is in an apple? How much in a slice of pizza? But curiosity quickly curdled into fear. The numbers started to feel like judgments. I stopped eating sweets. Then I cut out bread. Then I began to skip dinner. I became a master of deception in my own kitchen. I would tell my mother I wasn't hungry, that I had a big lunch, while I sat there drinking glass after glass of ice water, trying to drown the hollow growl in my stomach. I learned to love the feeling of emptiness. It felt like purity. It felt like discipline. By the 10th grade, I had shed 10 pounds. The reaction was instantaneous, and it was intoxicating. "You look so much better," my history teacher said, smiling at me in a way she never had before. "You look like a model." Julia squealed, grabbing my arm with a mixture of envy and admiration. "You've become so slender," said Jason, the boy with the messy hair and kind eyes, the boy I had been crushing on for 2 years. Every compliment was a hit of dopamine. It was a drug, potent and addictive. I craved more. I needed to hear it again. I needed to secure my place in this new, approving world. I escalated the war on my body. I started running at 5 a.m., pounding the pavement while the rest of the suburb slept, running until my lungs burned and my legs shook. I did 200 squats before bed. I drank only green tea, convincing myself that the bitter taste was the taste of success. The weight fell off, melting away, but along with the fat, something else was eroding. A part of my soul was dissolving. By the time senior year arrived, and with it the looming specter of prom, I had set a singular, non-negotiable goal. I would be perfect. The dress had to fit without a single wrinkle, without a single fold of skin betraying my humanity. My arms had to be thin, sculpted like marble. My face had to be sharp, angular. My stomach, flat and concave. I looked at magazines, at the airbrushed impossible women, and thought, that is the standard. That is the requirement. My mother was thrilled. She saw her creation coming to life. "You look amazing, Sarah," she would say, brushing my hair, her eyes meeting mine in the vanity mirror. "Everyone is going to be in shock when they see you." But inside, beneath the skin she admired, I felt like I was vanishing. I was terrified of food. A grape felt like a grenade. I was terrified of the mirror. I checked it 50 times a day, looking for imaginary bloating. I was terrified that if I ate one extra bite, the entire house of cards would collapse, and I would be the ugly Sarah again. I began to isolate myself. I avoided lunches with friends, retreating to the library to study, which was just a cover for not eating. I turned down invitations to cafes, to movie nights, to family dinners. I lived in a regime of totalitarian control, and it was all for one photograph, the prom photo. The image that was supposed to be the trophy, the proof that I had done it, that I had won, that I was perfect. But I didn't know then that this specific photograph would become the very thing I would never possess. It all started with the dress. I saw it on a humid Saturday afternoon in a boutique window on South Congress Avenue. My mother and I were walking, the air thick with the scent of food trucks and exhaust, when the light hit the fabric. It wasn't just a dress, it was a vision. It was champagne-colored silk, liquid and shimmering. It had an off-the-shoulder neckline that demanded elegance, a cinched waist, and a skirt that flowed like water. It looked like something a movie star would wear to accept an award. "Sarah, that's the one," my mother whispered. She stopped on the sidewalk, her hand gripping my shoulder. Her eyes lit up with that specific hunger she got when she saw beauty. "You will look like a star in that." We went inside. The air conditioning was freezing, a sharp contrast to the Texas heat. The shop smelled of lavender and expensive fabric. I took the dress into the changing room, my hands trembling slightly as I unzipped my jeans. The silk felt cold against my skin as I pulled it up. I turned to the three-way mirror. The dress was beautiful. Objectively, it was a masterpiece. But when I looked at myself, I didn't see a star. The dysmorphia was a lens that distorted everything. I looked at my arms and saw them as thick, heavy logs. I looked at my waist and saw softness where there should have been steel. I looked at my cheeks and saw them as impossibly round, like a child's. The mirror lied to me, or maybe my brain did. I saw flaws that didn't exist. "I need to lose weight," I said, my voice barely a whisper, staring at my own eyes in the glass. My mother stood behind me, adjusting a strap. She didn't contradict me. She didn't say, "You are already thin." She nodded, examining the fit critically. "Just a little," she agreed. "Just a little more definition, and it will be perfect." That was the sentence. Just a little. From that moment, a little mutated into everything. I began with the evenings. No dinner, just tea. Then I cut out breakfast. I would sit at the kitchen table, push a spoon around an empty bowl, and tell my parents I was eating at school. At school, I told my friends I had a big breakfast. I became a ghost at mealtimes, subsisting on water and lies. I bought a notebook. In it, I didn't write poems or dreams. I wrote numbers. I recorded every calorie that entered my body, and I underlined in red ink every meal I successfully skipped. The hunger pains were sharp at first, violent cramps that made me double over. But after a while, they dulled into a constant numbing ache, a white noise. The weight began to drop. At first, it was a slow trickle, but then it became a landslide. I felt a terrifying electric euphoria every morning when I stepped on the scale and the number was lower than the day before. It felt like flying. "You look incredible," Julia said one day in the cafeteria, watching me drink a Diet Coke while she ate a sandwich. There was a flicker of worry in her eyes, but the admiration was louder. "You are literally a model," Maddie sighed, shaking her head. "You've become so fragile," Jason said to me by the lockers. He reached out and touched my elbow, and his hand felt enormous around my shrinking arm. Like a bird, every word was thunderous applause. I was performing on a high wire, and the audience was cheering, unaware that there was no net. But the cost of admission was my vitality. As the wait finished, so did my mind. I began waking up with headaches that felt like iron bands tightening around my skull. My vision would spot with black dots when I stood up too fast. Classes became a blur. The teachers' voices sounded like they were underwater. I would stare at a textbook page for 20 minutes and realize I hadn't understood a single sentence. I was forgetting words, losing my train of thought mid-sentence. One afternoon, during the rehearsal for the graduation ceremony, the world tilted. I was standing on the risers in the gymnasium, the smell of floor wax and old sweat filling my nose. Suddenly, the room elongated. The floor seemed to rush up toward me. I grabbed the edge of a table, my knuckles turning white, fighting to keep the darkness at the edges of my vision at bay. "Is everything okay?" Mrs. Gable, the choir teacher, asked, stepping toward me. I forced a smile. It felt like stretching dried clay. I nodded. "Just didn't get enough sleep," I lied. I was always lying. I wasn't tired. I was starving. By the week of prom, I had lost 20 pounds. I tried on the champagne dress again. It hung on me slightly, but I told myself it was elegant. I looked exactly the way I had dreamed. Sharp, angular, empty. But inside that emptiness, there was no joy. There was only a vast, echoing cave of anxiety. I looked at myself in the mirror the night before prom and thought, I should be happy. I won. Why do I feel so afraid? I didn't know that my body was already in revolt. I didn't know that my heart was struggling to beat, that my electrolytes were haywire. I didn't know that behind a perfect exterior, my organs were cannibalizing themselves to keep me alive. And I didn't know that it would all end the moment the camera clicked, without me in the frame. The day of prom dawned with a sensation of profound, vibrating anxiety. I woke up at 6 a.m., hours before I needed to, though my alarm was set for 9. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic, bird-like fluttering that felt dangerous. It wasn't excitement, it was the panic of a body running on fumes. I walked to the full-length mirror in my bedroom. The morning light was gray and unforgiving. My reflection stared back, hollow cheeks, collarbones that protruded like coat hangers, arms as thin as a child's. My skin had a grayish, translucent cast. I should have been satisfied. This was the goal. This was the destination. But looking at the skeletal frame, I felt a cold shiver of terror. I went to the kitchen. The house was silent. I poured a glass of water and took an apple from the bowl. I stared at it for 5 minutes. Finally, I cut it in half. I ate the half in tiny measured bites, chewing slowly, trying to convince my stomach that this was a meal. "That's enough," I whispered to the empty room. "Don't ruin it now." My mother entered, a whirlwind of energy and perfume. "Sarah! Today is the day," she beamed, clasping her hands. "You look stunning, honey. Just stunning." I nodded, stretching my lips into a smile I didn't feel. We went to the salon. The chair was comfortable, and I almost fell asleep while the stylist worked. She curled my hair into soft, cascading waves. She applied makeup, concealer to hide the dark circles that hunger had painted under my eyes, highlighter to accentuate the cheekbones that were already too sharp. I looked at the final result in the lighted mirror. With the hair and the paint, the sickness was masked. I looked like a porcelain doll. I looked like the girl I wanted to be. But when I stood up to leave, the room spun violently. The floor seemed to drop 3 feet. I gripped the stylus station, knocking over a comb. "Are you okay, sweetie?" the makeup artist asked, her hand darting out to steady me. "Just tired," I breathed, waiting for the black spots to clear. Nerves. The evening arrived. The limousine pulled up, a sleek white beast. Maddie, Julia, and Jason were there. They looked vibrant, healthy, alive. They were laughing, taking selfies, passing a flask of something illicit. I sat in a corner of the dark interior, the leather cold against my legs, trying to hide the tremors in my hands. We arrived at the venue, a hotel ballroom downtown. As we walked in, the sensory assault was immediate. The heat was suffocating, a wall of humidity and body warmth. The music was deafening, the bass thumping in my chest, vibrating through my empty stomach like a physical blow. The strobe lights slashed through the darkness, disorienting me. "Sarah, let's dance!" Julia screamed over the music, grabbing my hand. Her grip felt impossibly strong. I shook my head, pulling back. "Later," I mouthed. I couldn't dance. I knew if I jumped, my legs would buckle. I was conserving every ounce of glucose left in my bloodstream just to remain upright. I drifted to the refreshments table and took a glass of ice water. The condensation dripped onto my fingers. Jason appeared beside me. He looked handsome in his tuxedo, but his brow was furrowed. "You look incredible, Sarah," he said, but the tone wasn't right. It wasn't lust, it was concern. I smiled, a practiced, brittle thing. "Thank you. Are you going to eat anything?" he asked, gesturing to the buffet piled high with sliders and fruit. "You haven't touched a thing." "Not hungry," I said automatically. "Adrenaline," he frowned, looking at me closely, seeing past the makeup. He didn't say anything else, but the silence between us was heavy. Then, the DJ's voice cut through the room, booming over the speakers. "All right, class of 2024, everyone gather on the main floor. It's time for the big group photo." This was it, the moment, the documentation, the proof I existed. I moved toward the center of the room with the crowd. I found my spot in the middle, flanked by Maddie and Jason. Everyone was cheering, squeezing together, fixing their hair. The energy was electric. I tried to stand tall. I tried to lock my knees, but the heat was rising, swirling around me. The photographer climbed a ladder, holding a massive camera. "Okay, everyone, big smiles," he yelled. "On the count of 3. 1. My vision began to tunnel. The edges of the world turned gray, then black. The voices sounded like they were coming through a long metal pipe. 2. The floor vanished. 3, the photographer shouted, but I never heard it. In that split second between 2 and 3, the world simply ceased to exist. I felt my knees dissolve. It wasn't a stumble. It was a complete structural failure. My body, which I had treated like a machine for months, finally cut the power. I felt myself becoming impossibly light, weightless, as if gravity had released its hold on me. The ringing in my ears turned into a scream. The colors of the dresses and tuxedos smeared into a kaleidoscope of meaningless light. I tried to reach out, to grab Jason's arm, but my signals weren't reaching my hands. The last thing I saw was the blinding white flare of the camera flash, a supernova exploding in the dark, and the faces of my friends, frozen in perfect, joyous smiles, looking at the lens, unaware that I was already falling. Then, absolute darkness. I crumpled. I hit the floor hard, right in the center, right in front of the lens, but below the frame. Chaos erupted. The music distorted. I heard screams, but they sounded miles away, muffled by thick cotton. "Sarah! Oh my God, she fell!" "Give her air!" I felt vibrations on the floorboards, footsteps running toward me. But I was no longer in the room. I was floating in a cold, dark void. When consciousness began to flicker back, it was fragmented. I was lying on the cold, hard wood of the ballroom floor. It felt amazing against my burning skin. I saw faces looming over me, distorted, terrified faces. Teachers. Jason. Julia was on her knees beside me, holding my limp hand. Her mascara was running, her eyes were wide with a terror I had never seen before. "Sarah, wake up!" she was screaming, her voice cracking. "Please, wake up!" I tried to open my eyes fully, but my eyelids felt like lead weights. The world was a blur of spinning lights. My head was spinning with a nausea so profound I thought I would die right there. "She hasn't eaten all night," someone said. It sounded like Jason. His voice was shaking. "Call 911!" a teacher shouted. "Get the paramedics!" I heard the sirens in the distance. I felt the vibration of the chaos. And in that moment of semi-lucidity, a thought pierced through the fog, sharper than pain. I missed it. I wasn't in the photo. The shutter had clicked while I was on the floor. The moment I had starved for, the moment I had suffered for, the moment that was supposed to validate my entire existence, it had happened without me. In the yearbook, there would be a sea of smiling faces. And in the center, where I was supposed to stand in my champagne dress, there would be a gap, a hole, a negative space. It was a cruel, perfect irony. I had spent months trying to erase parts of myself to fit into a mold, and in the end, I had succeeded too well. I had erased myself completely. I closed my eyes, too weak to cry, and let the darkness swallow me whole again. I opened my eyes to a blinding, sterile white. For a long time, I didn't know where I was. The air smelled sharp, antiseptic, and floor cleaner. There was a rhythmic, mechanical beeping sound to my left. Beep, eep, beep. It was the sound of a machine proving I was alive. "Sarah." The voice was broken. I turned my head slowly. It felt heavy, like a stone. My mother was sitting in a plastic chair beside the bed. She looked like she had aged 10 years in one night. Her perfect hair was messy, her makeup smeared. Her eyes were red and swollen. My father stood behind her, his arms crossed tightly over his chest, holding himself together. His face was gray, etched with a fear that terrified me more than the hospital room. "Where am I?" I whispered. My throat felt like sandpaper. "You're in the hospital, baby," Mom said, her voice trembling. She reached out and took my hand. Her skin was warm, mine felt like ice. "You passed out at prom." I closed my eyes as the memory crashed over me like a wave. The heat, the flash, the fall. I remembered the photo that didn't exist, the empty space. I tried to speak, but the tears choked me. I just wanted to be perfect. The words hung in the sterile air, sad and small. "I ruined everything," I sobbed. "I ruined myself." My mother broke down. She buried her face in the bedsheet near my hand. My father stepped forward, his stoicism shattering. He reached out and brushed the hair from my forehead. "Sarah," he said, his voice thick, "we don't love you for how you look. We don't care about the dress size. We love you. We love who you are." Those words hit me harder than the hunger ever had. Harder than any compliment. We love who you are. I realized then that I didn't know who you are was anymore. I had starved her away. The door opened, and a doctor walked in. He held a clipboard and looked at me with a grave, professional kindness. "Sarah," he said gently, "we've run some tests. Your electrolytes are critically low, your heart rhythm is irregular, you are showing severe signs of anorexia nervosa." He paused, letting the clinical terms sink in. "Your body is exhausted," he continued. "If you had gone on like this, if you hadn't collapsed when you did, we might be having a very different conversation right now. You were on the edge." I listened to him, and the reality settled in my bones. I had almost killed myself for a picture. I had almost stopped my own heart to look good in a dress. I looked at my parents. I saw the terror in their eyes, the terror of losing a child. And I saw a flicker of hope that I was still there. I realized I had a choice. I could close my eyes and let the darkness win, or I could fight. "I want to get better," I whispered. The words felt foreign but true. "I don't want to hide anymore. I don't want to disappear." My mother squeezed my hand so hard it hurt, but it was a good pain. It was a grounding pain. My father put his hand on my shoulder, a heavy, comforting weight. In that hospital bed, hooked up to IVs, wearing a gown that wasn't flat, much more terrible, more messy than any of the most famed figures I had for me. I knew the road ahead would be brutal. Therapy, meal plans, the screaming voice in my head that I would have to learn to ignore. but I had taken the first breath. I often think about that photograph, the one that doesn't exist. I think about the empty space in the yearbook, right in the center of the crowd, where I should have been standing in my champagne silk, smiling a fake smile. Instead, there is just a gap where the background shows through. For a long time, I couldn't look at that yearbook, but now I see it differently. That empty space is not a failure. It is a symbol. It is a monument to the girl who tried to erase herself to satisfy a world that would never be satisfied. It is a visual representation of what happens when you prioritize the image over the substance. I tried to become two-dimensional, and I succeeded. I became invisible. The recovery was not a montage. It was messy. It was crying over a bowl of oatmeal. It was panic attacks in grocery stores. It was learning to trust my body again, to treat it not as a rebellious animal that needed to be caged, but as my home, my only home. I kept a journal. I wrote down the fears. I learned to look in the mirror and say, thank you, to my legs for carrying me, to my heart for beating even when I starved it. I learned to accept compliments not as a measure of my worth, but just as words. My parents stood by me. Julia and Maddie were there, confused at first, but patient. Jason, we talked. He told me he had been scared for me for months but didn't know how to say it. He told me he was proud of me for fighting. I have friends who have never seen me at my thinnest, who love me for my laugh, for my bad jokes, for my mind. I am heavier now than I was then. I take up space, and I am okay with that. Now, when I open that old album and see the gap in the class photo, I don't cry. I smile, a genuine smile, because that missing photo is the most important picture of my life. It is the photo that saved me. It is the reminder that I almost vanished, and the proof that I chose to come back. I want to ask you, the one listening to this, have you ever felt that you must be perfect to be worthy of love? Have you ever chipped away pieces of your soul to fit into someone else's expectation? Have you ever looked at your reflection and seen an enemy? If you answered yes, know this: you are not alone, and you do not have to stay on that path. You can step off the treadmill, you can put down the armor. The moral of my story is simple, but it took me almost losing my life to learn it. True beauty begins the moment you decide to stop destroying yourself